Bryce first met Julie when he moved in with his family to the same neighborhood as her. He was about to start second grade at a new school. Julie, on the other hand, took an odd liking to the young boy the first time she saw him. Julie has never stopped trying to get Bryce's attention since that moment. Bryce, on the other hand, found it difficult to be around her. She used to irritate him by tailing him. Julie made it difficult for him even at school. Since the first day of school, when Julie hugged him in front of the entire class, the kids in his class have constantly teased Bryce about his little girlfriend. He took every opportunity to ignore and avoid her, knowing she was obsessed with him for some reason. Bryce, on the other hand, couldn't bring himself to tell Julie not to follow him around. Julie, on the other hand, fell in love with Bryce the moment she saw his dazzling eyes. She always assumed that he felt the same way about her but was too shy to tell her. When she first saw his family, she offered his father to help them move in, which led to them both holding each other's hands. This felt like a dream to Julie, who imagined herself about to have her first kiss. But when Bryce's mother appeared, he ran behind her, his face flushed. Julie had wanted to help Bryce overcome his shyness ever since that incident. It was all for the same reason that I followed him around and hugged him in front of the entire class. However, in 6th grade, Bryce devised a strategy to permanently eliminate Julie. He asked out Sherry, the most popular girl in his class, who Julie didn't like for some reason, and it was perfect for Bryce. When he was in front of Julie, he held hands and pretended to be a real couple with Sherry. Julie stopped bothering him at school, and his plan was coming together perfectly. But his plan backfired when one of his best friends, Garrett, who had a crush on Sherry, revealed Bryce's plan to her. When Sherry discovered what Bryce was up to and that he was using her, she ended the relationship by slapping him across the face. After that incident, Julie returned to her normal self, even sniffing his hair from behind. Bryce was obviously terrified, hoping that things would improve in the next grade and they would have different classes. The chapter about Sherry and Bryce dating was very similar for Julie. Sherry was an obnoxious girl who never paid attention to anyone but herself. Julie believed that Sherry was using her lust to take Bryce away from her, and she hoped that Bryce would see through her and leave her soon. Her desire was quickly fulfilled when she saw them breaking up and Sherry slapping him in the face. Bryce soon resumed his polite conversation with Julie. She sat behind him for a year, sniffing his watermelon-scented hair. Bryce's grandfather also learned about Julie from a newspaper article in which she was featured for her opposition to the removal of her beloved sycamore tree. She loved the sycamore tree and spent every morning at the top, asking questions. She even invited Bryce to come with her to enjoy the view, which he always declined, making up an excuse. Because of her habit of shouting while up in the tree, everyone in the neighborhood was bugged. People in town, including Bryce's father, were bothered by another aspect of Julie's family, their home. Her father spent a lot of time painting on his lawn, and it was a rundown house with vines and weeds growing everywhere. Despite this, Bryce's grandfather was very interested in learning about Julie through his grandson. He showed Bryce the newspaper, which featured Julie again, and praised her, saying she has an iron backbone. He even invited her to their house, but Bryce couldn't understand why his grandfather was interested in the annoying girl in his neighborhood. Julie, on the other hand, saw the sycamore tree as more than that. It was when her father told her about the beauty of the landscape, which she initially didn't understand. However, when the girl reached the top of the tree, she could see the entire town, the fields, and the sun rising over the horizon. It was her favorite spot, where she would climb every morning to feel the cool, tingly breeze on her skin. She understood what her father wanted her to know about the landscape's beauty. The girl gradually grew to appreciate the tree for what it showed her and how it made her feel. One day, however, she noticed some woodcutters approaching the tree with their machines. They intended to cut it down at the request of the landowner and instructed the girl to climb down. She yelled for help to the kids and Bryce, who was passing by. Despite Julie's desperate cries, none of the kids came up to help her protest the tree's cutting, leaving her alone. The firemen arrived quickly, and her father was summoned. Julie's father eventually persuaded her to come down from the tree. Julie remained silent for the next few weeks, losing her favorite spot in town. Bryce, too, felt sorry for her. When he saw her like this, he considered approaching her to express his sympathy, but he quickly abandoned the idea after being reminded that this was all he wished for. She was no longer bothering him. Julie's father gave her a painting of her beloved sycamore tree sometime after the incident. She was overjoyed to see the tree again and hugged her father. She hung the painting in her room, where she saw it first thing in the morning and last thing before going to bed every day. She eventually felt her perception of things and Bryce shift, and she wondered if she still felt the same way about Bryce. Julie began to like eggs a few weeks later. She studied them, watched them grow, and was fascinated after seeing the sign of life up close. She competed in and won their school's science fair, where she demonstrated and explained the hatching of the eggs. Bryce, on the other hand, wasn't often of her egg obsession and was upset that she won first place instead of him. While caring for her chickens, she noticed that her hens were laying eggs, and from that day forward, their house was overflowing with eggs. Soon after, her neighbors offered to pay her for the eggs, so she decided to give the rest to Bryce's family as a thank you for their generosity. Bryce's grandfather and mother were grateful for her gift and kind nature, but Bryce and his father had a different opinion. They both disliked receiving eggs from the girl. His father requested that he return the eggs. Bryce couldn't say no to her and devised a plan to throw her eggs whenever she delivered them to him. She was delighted to share the eggs with his family, and he threw them out with the garbage. This went on for a few weeks, but Julie noticed him throwing away the eggs she had given him one day. She was furious with him, ignoring and avoiding him at school and refusing to sit at the same table with him. It reminded Bryce of him being a jerk, which was far worse than her annoying her. This quickly became worse when he noticed his grandfather with Julie in her yard, assisting her with it. He was envious of the girl because his grandfather talked to her more than he did with Bryce, despite the fact that they shared a house. The same night, Chet approached Bryce and informed him about the eggs. Chet asked Bryce to apologize to Julie during their small talk, saying it would make him feel better. Bryce did exactly that the next day, gathering the courage to stand in front of her. He thanked her for her efforts in the yard and apologized for breaking the eggs. Julie accepted the apology and they had a brief discussion. Julie stated that Bryce was extremely fortunate to have a grandfather like Chet, and that he mentioned to Chet that she reminded him of his deceased wife. Things gradually returned to normal after that. Bryce was relieved to be rid of the burden he had been carrying for weeks. However, while Bryce was watching TV with his family one night, his father got into a heated argument with Grandpa Chet. Chet's father was furious at him for spending time with a stranger instead of his own grandson. He also made fun of Julie's family, calling them clumsy and strange. Chet retorted angrily that the family had several issues and explained why they couldn't maintain their lawn or house. He mentioned Julie's uncle, who, like Bryce, had a brain abnormality as a result of his neck becoming wrapped around with the umbilical cord as a baby. Hearing the argument, Bryce's mother walked away, followed by his father. Chet revealed to Bryce that he, too, had his neck wrapped around, but luckily, the doctors were able to untangle it before any further harm was done. Chet and Bryce went outside for a walk, and his grandfather told him Julie was a very special girl. He told him how they had talked for hours about how she felt while she was on that tree. Bryce couldn't get this thought out of his head. He kept thinking about her all night, how she talked about being held above the ground and having the cold breeze touch her hair. This was not how a child spoke, and he gradually grew fond of her. Returning to Julie's house, before she fixed her yard, she asked her parents for permission to do so, revealing that Bryce had called her yard a mess. Her mother was deeply shaken and hurt by this and insisted on her husband doing something about it, whereas Julie's father wanted to but couldn't help himself. It was because he needed to look after his brother, and Julie's mother had asked him to prioritize his family. They argued and began yelling at each other before they realized it, but both later apologized to Julie for the fight at the table. Julie decided to fix the lawn by herself the next day when Chet came in to assist her. He mentioned that he read about her in the newspaper, and that if his wife had been there, she would have done the same, and she would have stayed up the tree with Julie all night if that was what it took to save that spectacular view. The entire time they worked on the yard, they talked about things like the sycamore tree and her preferences. Her perception of her friends shifted over time, and she eventually lost interest in Bryce. Bryce, on the other hand, had Julie on his mind and kept staring at her in the classrooms. This was exacerbated when his mother announced at his family table that she was going to invite Julie's family over for dinner. Both Bryce's father and Bryce were opposed to the decision, but it was too late. The lady had already made up her mind. Garrett discovered the newspaper article featuring Julie in his folder at school, and Bryce had no cover-up on him. He and Garrett later discussed his sudden interest in Julie. Garrett explained that he didn't like her, he just felt bad for throwing away the eggs she had given him and insulting her yard. Garrett continued to make fun of Julie and, eventually, her mentally challenged uncle. Bryce had had enough of his friend crossing the line. Bryce left Garrett in the library and went home, giving him a fake laugh. Bryce then admitted that he had feelings for her because he felt wrong when Garrett insulted her. This had never happened before. Julie, on the other hand, heard everything Bryce and Garrett said. When she was studying in the library, a Julie friend approached her and told her that she had discovered Bryce had a huge crush on Julie and that she had seen him looking at her. Julie initially denied it, but her friend dragged her to where Garrett and Bryce were conversing. When Garrett made fun of Julie's uncle and Bryce laughed about it, both girls began eavesdropping on the boys. Julie was devastated by this and immediately lost all feelings for Bryce. Julie, who was watering her lawn at the time, noticed her father leave the property for his brother, Daniel's, birthday. Julie insisted on seeing her uncle as well, and they both went to the apartment Daniel was staying in. Daniel was initially terrified of Julie, but things improved after he discovered she was his niece, and Julie's father presented him with all of the gifts he had brought for his birthday. They then went to an ice cream shop to celebrate the occasion. In the ice cream shop, however, Daniel caused quite a stir by dropping his ice cream. He immediately returned to normal behavior when Julie gave him another cone, and the three quickly returned to the apartment, saying their goodbyes to Daniel. Julie realized after the incident in the shop why her father couldn't care for his brother on his own, and how things had gotten out of hand. When Julie's mother returned home, she revealed that Bryce's mother had invited their family to dinner. Julie and her father were both disappointed, knowing how the Bryce family had treated them, insulting Julie and making fun of their problems. However, after observing Julie's mother's enthusiasm for the dinner, both of them agreed to pay a visit to the family. Julie was getting ready for the party when she noticed the painting her father had made for her. She reflected on how Bryce was never her friend and was never there for her when she needed him. She was about to tell her mother that she didn't want to go to his house, but seeing how happy her mother was about the dinner, she couldn't. Bryce, on the other hand, was secretly excited and was getting ready for Julie as the doorbell rang and she arrived with her family. Bryce approached Julie as the two families exchanged greetings. He complimented her on her appearance, but she refused to speak to him again because she had overheard him and Garrett making fun of her uncle at the library. Before the young man could comprehend what had just occurred, she had left him and joined the conversation between her father and grandfather Chet. Bryce was speechless and embarrassed. Eventually mustering the courage to speak to her again, he apologized, admitting that what Garrett said was incorrect. But he couldn't justify himself by laughing about it and not telling his friend. She took a seat at the table with her family, leaving him yet again, calling him a coward for not speaking up for his friend. She sat in front of him at the table, not saying anything to him or even looking at him. Unaware of the cold conflict between the two children, the families conversed on a variety of topics. Bryce's father brought up the sycamore tree, saying he was relieved that it had been cut down. On that note, Julie's father mentioned how it was the neighborhood's crown jewel for some. Bryce wanted to speak up as well, but he didn't because he didn't want to offend his father. The conversation continued when Bryce's father sparked it by asking Mark and Matt, Julie's brothers, about their future plans. The brothers then revealed that they intended to focus on their music careers after high school, to which the man's wife added that Bryce's father used to be a saxophone player. The twin brothers invited him to jam with them at some point, but the man declined, claiming that it was a thing of the past. Hearing this, Bryce was reminded of something. He noticed his father attempting, but failing, to fake a smile. Julie also noticed that Bryce's father had something dark and rotten inside him that he kept hidden from everyone. The rest of the evening flew by, but Julie still refused to look at him. Julie apologized to him for being rude to him before leaving, but he knew she wouldn't forgive him, and he felt worthless and ashamed. Shortly after dinner, the family got into another small argument, which quickly escalated, and Bryce's father ended up slapping his own daughter. On his bed, Bryce wondered why his father was acting so strangely. He was perplexed as to why his father despised Julie's family, her father's paintings, his yard, and so on. He was simply envious of them and angry with himself, but the young man couldn't think of why. But whatever the reason, it didn't matter because he was no longer a part of Julie's life, he reasoned. Julie, on the other hand, slept soundly that night, relieved not to have to think about Bryce and thankful for the family she had. Soon after, the school hosted the basket boy auction, in which the girls bid to have lunch with the boys presented on stage. Bryce was terrified of having to walk in front of the stage where the girls were going to bid on him. On the day of the presentation, he was nervous about Julie bidding on him. He did, however, hear her bid on Eddie, a nice boy in the class who had no other bidders. Sherry, the most beautiful girl in school, won the bid to have lunch with Bryce. He couldn't think of anything else but Julie enjoying and laughing behind Sherry, who was having lunch with someone else, at the lunch table. He got out of his chair and yanked Julie out of hers, grabbing her hand. He kissed her with his eyes closed. Julie, on the other hand, pushed him back and exited the room full of people who were now laughing at Bryce for blowing up his first kiss. Garrett caught up to him as he walked out to pursue Julie. He was enraged at Bryce for abandoning Sherry for someone strange like Julie. This time, however, Bryce did not listen to her and pushed Garrett away, claiming that he would not understand. He returned home with dirty dishes in his basket and went straight to Julie's apartment, knocking on her door. However, no one answered his call. When he got home, he tried calling Julie's cell phone, but Julie's mother answered, telling him that Julie didn't want to talk to him. Bryce knew he wanted to talk to her, and then he had an idea. However, Julie's experience on the day of the auction was very different. He decided to leave her money at her house in the morning so she wouldn't be tempted to bid for him. However, while riding her bike, Julie's neighbor called out to her, handing her the money she owed the little girl for the eggs she had delivered to her. Initially resisting, Julie decided to take the money to her school and pretend she didn't have it. When she arrived at school, she ran into Sherry, who was planning to bid on Bryce. Julie, despite her rage, told her to go ahead and waste her money on him because she was already over him. But the closer his name was to being announced, the more impatient she became. However, before Bryce arrived, Eddie bid for him out of sympathy because no one else was. She then ate lunch with Eddie, but her thoughts kept returning to his side, where Bryce was sitting. When he approached her to kiss her, she pushed him away and went straight home. For 2 weeks, she ignored him, not returning his calls or answering his knocks at the door. He finally gave up after 2 days of trying to contact her. Julie thought she had gotten rid of him, but she had no idea he was digging a hole in her garden. She was about to ask him to leave when Julie's father informed him that he had given him permission to dig that hole himself. She looked out the window, wondering how her father could approve of him destroying her garden. Suddenly, the boy moved out of her line of sight, only to return with a large plant in his hands. He placed the plant in the hole he had dug and began to cover it up. Julie soon realized he was planting a sycamore tree in her garden for her. She approached him, looking at her dazzling eyes, which she had fallen in love with the first time she saw them. As Julie approached him, he was reminded of the first time he saw her run up to him. They both got low to the ground as he gently touched Julie's hand, and she smiled at him again as they planted the sycamore plant in the ground.